Zelda Breath of the Wild is the most recent and one of the most enjoyable Zelda games to date, but seeing as it came out 2 years ago, I guess everybody already knows that. But what not everybody knows, in fact what pretty much no one knows, is where the heck it fits on the timeline. Nobody except me. Yes, I am here to tell you that every video of people placing the game in the timeline is wrong! But a ton of work still went into those other theories, and those guys really deserve the attention. So I'm gonna be putting links to all of them in the description. And get it, link? But before we get into placement, let's clear some things up for casual players and people who still think this guy is Zelda. Basically, after 25 years of releasing Zelda games, Nintendo decided to release a timeline to explain the order in which the games take place. Mostly because fans needed some explanation for how Hyrule keeps falling back into chaos. So in 2011, Nintendo released Skyward Sword, which takes place at the beginning of the timeline, and explains that Link's, Ganon's, and Zelda's continuous rebirth and conflict is caused by Demise's curse in his final breath. His hate never perishes, it is born anew in a cycle without end, and those with the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero will be bound to this curse. Basically, Demise was so salty about losing that he decided he would just lose over and over again to the same people.
Not a great plan.
That's not the complicated part. The thing is, the official Zelda timeline was really more of an afterthought. It wasn't something planned or set up from the start, and as a result, to give the franchise continuity, Nintendo gave it 3 continuities. This is because Link's time travel in Ocarina of Time created 3 alternate realities. See, at the end of the game, after defeating Ganon, Zelda sends Link back to his own time 7 years ago, where he warns young Zelda of Ganondorf's plan to steal the Triforce of Power, preventing the whole game's events from ever coming to fruition. This creates the child era, where Link never becomes an adult. However, future Zelda's decision to send adult Link to the child era didn't erase her reality from existence. Instead, it left the future without a hero, creating the adult era, where Ganon returns and takes over Hyrule yet again. Finally, there's the Fallen Hero timeline, where Ganondorf defeated Link and claimed all 3 pieces of the Triforce, forcing the 7 sages led by Princess Zelda to seal Ganon and the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. Now, before we go any further, I want to rule out some evidence. Amiibo and DLC don't count. We can see references to objects and characters from all 3 timelines, but that's all they are, references. If you want proof that this doesn't count as actual evidence, Link can wear Rex's outfit from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which has no connection to Breath of the Wild, let alone the Zelda franchise. Oh yeah, and just real quick, this video completely spoils Breath of the Wild, and a bunch of other Zelda games too, so just a heads up about that. And with that, only one question remains: where does Breath of the Wild fit in the timeline? The first order of business is establishing whether the game takes place before or after Ocarina of Time. And luckily, it's pretty easy to figure out. The Temple of Time, a landmark only seen in Ocarina of Time, can be found on the Great Plateau at the start of the game. We can assume this means Breath of the Wild comes after Ocarina, seeing as the temple has gone under some remodeling. I mean, yeah, that's what I'd call it. Those holes blown in the wall, they were just the architect's crazy innovations. I mean, it's not that the robots did it. Psh. But if that's not enough proof, Urbosa mentions Ganon
once adopted the form of a Gerudo.
Something he only did during and once after Ocarina of Time, meaning the game must take place after the split. Now we just have to figure out in which of the 3 timelines Breath of the Wild fits. Oh boy. The first clue comes from Zelda herself in a cutscene when she mentions the Master Sword being
skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight,
referencing Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time, both games taking place in all 3 timelines, but Twilight, of course referring to Twilight Princess's events, only takes place in the child era. So for Zelda to reference it directly, this game would have to take place in that timeline. That's it, mystery solved. Thank you for watching and remember to subscribe. Okay, it's not really that easy. If it were, this wouldn't be a debatable subject. So let's say Zelda's word isn't enough, and we also need some physical evidence to back up this placement. Luckily, there is some, and all you have to do is go find Arbiter's grounds in the desert, a location only previously seen in Twilight Princess. I'm surprised not everyone has mentioned this. I mean, it is pretty easy to find. You even have to come here to beat every boss in the game, and if you're like me, you showed up and kicked that Molduga's butt. So that's it. Breath of the Wild definitely takes place in the child timeline, right? Well, it would if it weren't for the fact that there's just as much evidence to suggest it takes place in the adult era. Since the Champion's Ballad was released, we have uncovered some new evidence, which can be found within Mipha's diary. Should we? What? It's for science! The diary actually tells us that Mifa isn't the first Zora princess to fall in love with Link. That honor goes to Ruto. This tells us that Breath of the Wild can't be in the child timeline, because Ruto only fell for Link after they spent time together in Jabu Jabu's belly and the Water Temple, which was erased from ever happening after Link was sent back in time at the end of Ocarina of Time in the child era, which means that the game must take place in either the adult or fallen hero timeline. But we don't have to stop there. There are 10 stone monuments surrounding Zora's domain, one of which explains that a man with evil intent, presumably Ganondorf, was defeated by Link, meaning the game must take place in the adult timeline. That's the only era in which Ruto both loved Link and defeated Ganon. But in the adult timeline, Hyrule is flooded, I hear you say. How could the whole land be uncovered? Well, the Koroks had a little solution to that. There's a pretty popular theory that they were successful in spreading the Great Deku Tree sprouts as we see them doing in Wind Waker. This was in hopes of one day draining the sea, and seeing as Breath of the Wild takes place so much later in the timeline, it's very much possible that the Koroks were successful. It would also explain why we see Koroks away from the Great Deku Tree's forest for the first time in any Zelda game, other than Wind Waker. Even then, it's only in a side quest, and they're only outside of the forest because they're spreading the Great Deku Tree's sprouts. And it doesn't take much exploration to find that all of Hyrule is covered in Koroks. Is it possible that all 900 of these guys set out to sow and protect the Great Deku Tree's sprouts? All in an effort to drain the sea? This is also supported by the giant whale carcasses found in the desert, Tabantha Mountains, and even at Death Mountain. If you talk to the 3 paleontologist brothers, they'll tell you that these skeletons are the remains of a giant aquatic life form, confirming that all corners of Hyrule were submerged at some stage. There's also the rock salt found all over Hyrule. If you read its description, it mentions the Great Sea in which the salt was formed. This also proves Hyrule was at some stage flooded. Oh yeah, and those of you wondering, that is totally a legitimate use of the Master Sword. Not wasteful at all. Also, the Rito are present in Breath of the Wild, a race which the Zora supposedly evolved into during the Adult Era. Because obviously, an aquatic species would feel the most selective pressure when the whole world gets flooded. But perhaps after the goddesses flooded Hyrule in the Adult Era, only half of the Zora tribe went to the surface and evolved into Rito. The others just waited below the surface until Hyrule was drained again. This would explain why we don't see them in Wind Waker. They weren't extinct, they were just living underwater. This explains how the Zora and Rito can both exist in the same Hyrule at the same time. So once again, we have both historical and geographical evidence that suggests one place in the timeline, but at least we've narrowed it down to either the adult or child era, right? Wrong! There's a surprising amount of evidence for this game being in the Fallen Hero timeline, from the old man who calls this the Era of Decline, a direct reference to the Era of Decline which only happened in the Fallen Hero timeline. Furthermore, Hyrule is littered with different landmarks only previously seen in the Fallen Hero timeline, such as Spectacle Rock, as Game Theory pointed out. However, land formations used as evidence doesn't really make sense. It's not like land masses were only formed or created because of a different outcome that occurred in Hyrule's history. I mean, think about it. Ganon killing Link wouldn't suddenly cause a new mountain to erupt out of the ground, and it definitely wouldn't cause Ganon to decide to build it. It just doesn't make any sense. Here's the thing, games in different timelines take place in different sections of Hyrule, but this is the biggest Hyrule has ever been, and as a result, it's going to have locations in every single Hyrule before it, and locations from every single timeline. I can't even count the existence of Arbiter's Grounds as proof of the child timeline, because that temple was built in honor of the sages and was used to banish criminals long before Ganondorf was sent there, meaning the temple predates Ocarina of Time and still exists in every single timeline. So with this in mind, let's not look for formations, but more importantly, who they're named after. A quick look around central Hyrule, and we can see Navi Lake, a misspelling of Navi from Ocarina of Time. And we can also see a place called Rabia Plain, just behind Kakariko Village. Now, if these spelling mistakes are consistent, that would mean Rabia would likely be a misspelling of Ravio from A Link Between Worlds. But here's the thing, Ravio is from a parallel universe called Lorule, and he only interacted with Hyrule in the Fallen Hero timeline in A Link Between Worlds. So for him to have any sort of impact on Hyrule, Breath of the Wild would have to take place in the Fallen Hero timeline. Also, although Lynels do only exist in the Fallen Hero timeline, it seems to me that this Ganon has more power than anyone before him. During a Blood Moon, he can create whatever monsters he wants. I mean, it's either that or he was only inspired to create Lynels after killing Link. Wait, so is he just like... Hey Link, you dead? Oh, I guess it's over then. Now there's only one thing to do. I'm gonna make giant man-horse lions! Do-do-do, But that's not the only previous evidence that can be disregarded. Although Zelda directly mentions Twilight Princess, in other translations she mentions the Great Sea from Wind Waker, so there is some ambiguity surrounding this statement. Additionally, evidence of the Great Sea would not only be found in the adult timeline. In Skyward Sword, we travel to the land of Lanayru, which was once a vast sea which became a desert in just 100 years. This explains the giant whales in Breath of the Wild's desert, and proves the whales may have existed in all three timelines before the split. Furthermore, the water dragon lady can pretty much flood Hyrule whenever the heck she wants, as seen when she submerges Farron Woods like it's NBD in Skyward Sword. Meaning, once again, we've proven Hyrule could have been flooded at any time in any timeline. Also, if you ask me, these skeletons look kinda like Levia, and they are called Leviathans, which sounds pretty similar. So maybe they're really sky whales, and that's why they've been found all over Hyrule. They're not aquatic at all, they all just fell out of the sky when they died. But we can also rule out evidence brought up by several other theorists, because there's another tablet in Zora's Domain, which proves that Breath of the Wild Zora's Domain is not the same one we've seen in previous Zelda titles. This Zora's Domain is a resettlement, but this means the location of Zora's Domain can't be used as evidence. In fact, we can't use the location of anything, as Hyrule completely changes between games in only a couple centuries. But Breath of the Wild is based well over 10,000 years after any previous Zelda game, meaning all of Hyrule could have dramatically changed by now. Also, most geographical placement is based on where Hyrule Castle is, but that thing has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times, where it stands means nothing. And even if it did mean something, Zora's Domain can just move to the right or left or up or down or anywhere whenever it wants. So basically, this game can still take place in any one of the three timelines. Excuse me one moment.
Everything I've done up until now, it was all for nothing.
But something weird is happening in this Hyrule. Characters that exist only in parallel universes seem to be leaving their mark on Hyrule, as Darmani from Majora's Mask does quite literally. His face is just hanging out there in the middle of Goron Village. But how could Darmani's face end up in Hyrule if he never even went there? The only person in Hyrule who ever met him was the Hero of Time. Does that mean after Link got back from Termina, he just waddled up to Darunia and was all like, "You gotta build this statue of this Goron I met in another dimension, making all these memories and treasures"? Oh, well, maybe. What did he do? Well, he didn't do that much. He just died so I could put on his face, turning me into him, and that's how I saved the world in just 3 days. Get out of here, you crazy kid, unless you came to play Zarya's song, in which case do so and go. Okay, so it's pretty clear this game has substantial evidence from all three timelines, making it pretty much impossible for us to conclusively sort it into any one timeline. However, this game can still make sense so long as you consider what The Legend of Zelda is. A legend. Just a story passed down time and time again from generation to generation without anyone knowing if these stories are actually true or not. But Breath of the Wild is different because it takes place in the real world, the Hyrule not in which the events of previous Zelda games took place, but where they were told. We can see this in Hyrule's geography, as every landmark is named after someone or some place from another Zelda game, as if every Zelda game from all three timelines is somehow remembered in this world. And places like Mabe Village ruins prove this. We thought these were the locations of previous Zelda games, but that would be impossible. Mabe Village is on a different island than Hyrule that never actually existed, it was just the Windfish's dream. Instead, places from the stories of old are being honored by having current locations named after them. In this Hyrule, the story of Darmani was passed down among the Gorons, just as the stories of Mikau and Lulu were passed down among the Zora, and the people who remembered those stories named places after them, but whether these people people actually existed or not is unknown. It's just a legend. That's what every Zelda game is. On the latest official Zelda timeline, we see that all games in the same timeline are closely linked, but Breath of the Wild falls under all three timelines, but has a horizontal line disjoining it from the others. I think this represents Breath of the Wild taking place on a whole new meta outside of the Zelda timelines. The King of Hyrule even states that the events of every other Zelda game are nothing more than just
legends and fairy tales.
At the start of Wind Waker, the game tells us that this is just one legend of which the people speak. In this Hyrule, every legend has been spoke, and no one knows which are real anymore. That's how elements of every Zelda timeline can be present in Breath of the Wild. It's the Hyrule not in which the legends of Zelda take place, but where they're told. Hey guys, thanks for sitting through this video. I know it was a pretty long one, but I wanted to put as much on the table as possible, and there were still things I didn't have time to include. Anyway, Nintendo will probably never confirm where this game takes place in the timeline, so I gave it my own explanation. Also, Eiji Aonuma said that the game's placement is up to the player's imagination, so this is where I put it. And if you think it belongs someplace else, then go ahead and believe that. Whatever you believe, I guess, sort of becomes true in its own way. That's really deep, oh my gosh. Anyway, so if you liked this video, then why not give it a like? Because that's what the like button is for. You can also click on the subscribe button to stay updated on all my future videos. There's gonna be a lot of them, and they're all gonna suck. Enjoy!